Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Tristram Neal, or Trish as some people know me, and I look after the off-road vehicles from Schumacher Racing. I'm one of the engineers there, and we work very hard to give you the products that you want to race, and with that I would like to help you with this. Before we get going, don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Anyway, let's get on to things. The L1 Evo is what I'd like to talk to you about. Absolutely fantastic car. Here it is. It's our bit of a beast car. Really enjoying driving this. Did the EOS round 1 this last weekend. Had a great time with it. You might have seen it, but I did pretty well in the stock. I enjoyed that class. Had to work very hard. There was a German in each class that was, from what I understand, one of the top stock guys, and he put up a brilliant fight, and I had to work very hard. I managed to take that, which was kind of cool. So this is my car. This is my ride, and I've currently put a 5.5 back in it, but at that meeting I was running 10.5 stock, and that's where we can talk a little bit about the Driveline and the benefits of running it on stock, and then we can talk about modified afterwards. So let's just take the body shed off. So in here you'll see our Driveline. My car's a little bit messy at the moment, kind of working on it all weekend, but I've given it a dust off, and we can have a look at this. You'll see that there is a rear belt just here, and then there is a front belt just there. It does what it says on the tin. The rear goes to the rear and the front goes to the front, and in between it we have a F.A.B, which is a F.A.B front adjustable brake. And why do we need that, are you saying? Why you need that is because we have a one-way bearing inside. You have 2 friction pads each side of that, and the pulley that drives the front of power can be adjusted about how much brake force is applied. The beauty of that is when you hack it down the straights, slam the brakes on, you can make it so the fronts actually don't brake as much as the rear, and you don't get that end-doing that happens, which could actually flip your car off the track. So you don't have to turn your car down to 80%. You don't load the suspension up as you don't want it to. Obviously we can tighten this up and lock it off so it acts just like a fixed unit. But with this we can actually back it off. We can look at certain corners and run it quite loose if you want to. That be for like AstroTurf, you can run it really loose if you want to and have it like an elite 2-wheel drive. Whack into corners on the brakes without the front loading up, and then get on the power and you'll have fixed drive to the front. Be absolutely fantastic. Whereas on carpet we back it up a bit. I get my elbows on the rear wheels and I turn the front to get a feel for it on the bench. Once I've worked that out, I can then move on from there. So let's talk about that, the rear belts and the front belt. Belt tensions on the stock car we can run relatively loose. Because there's not so much power in stock, we find that running the belts to a point that they're pretty soft be absolutely fine. On the front, just a fraction harder. Remember, always run your front belt slightly harder than the rear. When I say that, that's intention. So with the car braking on a slippery surface, and generally most surfaces, you'll have more stability if the front's doing the work first, keep in control. If the rear's coming in first, it's going to try and make the car rotate a little bit, and that's not so fun. On carpet, you're not going to feel that as much, but as a rule, go harder there. But if you're on a really slippery surface, let's say ice, the car's going to slide around quite a lot if you have more drag on the rear than the front. So that's simple enough. When we go to our modified cars, we apply the same principle. So the rear belts needs to be about 30% to 40%, no more than that on the rear tensioning, and it should be great. As it gets older, you might tension it a bit more due to, we won't call it belt stretch, but over its life it will become a little bit longer. On the front, again, we just set that slightly harder than the rear, so you always base the front off the rear, so slightly harder than the rear, but the rear is the important bit. Set it to 33%, that'll probably be about where you need to kind of be along that slot. So you have it on the looser setting, move it back to what would be 1/3, right, tighten that off, have a feel. That should be about right. Listen to it on the track. If it's making a load of clicking noises, have a look at it. There might be a problem, but it shouldn't be. Just have a little look. If it feels excessively loose, right, we'll just need to tighten it up a little bit. If you over tighten it, you will end up like losing the teeth if you just start jamming it up. It's not fair. It's like meshing the pinion spur gear together really tight. It's not going to enjoy itself. So you've just got to be respectful to that. But like I said, 30% is a good rule to start with and go from there. So we've talked about our belts, we've talked about the F.A.B. Let's talk about the diffs. They're connected each end. We've got the rear diff, the front diff. On the front we have the diff height availability that we can adjust. Front height, we can have it high, medium and low. When we have it low, we get more steering out the car. We generally run it on low most of the cases, and it'll make that nose tuck in. It'll allow the front end to kind of dip down a little bit more because it's not fighting, or that friction of that drive shaft, it becomes more and more irrelevant the closer it gets to that hinge pin because it's not moving as much. The higher we go with it, the more you get in that plunge, and that's not necessarily good if you want the front end to dip down and tuck in and get that mid-corner steering you're always after. Whereas on the rear we like to run it high. It helps get the force stopping the car rolling over through the friction of that joints, and that's great because it allows us to really hammer the car into the corner. The rear supported, it tells the front what to do at the same time, and off it goes. If you want to run the rear on the low setting, that is really good generally for low grip surfaces if there's not really much traction getting generated, so it gives a bit of harmony to things. It lets things move naturally on the car and stops any stiffening action that comes in. Because normally when that happens on a super low grip surface, it makes the car slide. So you need to find the right kind of balance on geometry and your diff heights and that kind of thing. And that applies for all cars, not just our car. So yeah, on the front, if you want to go to the diff high setting, that's a great setting to go to if you want to smooth the car out. You can go medium if you want to go halfway, but generally you're going into corners and you might find that the front's kind of dipping over and the car wants to flip. Going to diff high will smooth all that out. That'll be absolutely brilliant for you. So enjoy that setting and go with that. So now we've talked about diff heights, we've talked about your belt tensions, we've talked about the F.A.B. One last thing to talk about is the diffs. Really important thing is we like to, on the L1 Evo and the L1s, is run the same oils front and rear. And we generally run 2 gears. This will put extra stress on the pin, so just keep an eye on it, make sure you haven't broken anything over time. It wasn't the original intention of these diffs to have them on 2 gears, but we find on the track it makes them go a bit faster. If you have the 4 gears in there, what we find is the whole car, it's just a bit smoother, it doesn't change direction as quickly, just because you've got more to kind of work with. But with the 2 gear, what we find is getting on power, things bind up a little bit more, and you get what's more like a spool, and it sends itself really well. And you don't lose a lot of steering coming out the corners because of it. You get this extra drive, because the front's always pushing, and the rear's pulling. We find that you still get your steering because it's kind of modulating between the two, so you get this really nice steering around the corner. And off power, a nice little whip of steering, and off you go again. Whereas the 4 gear, it would be nice way of smoothing it out. When we find we're on super slippery surfaces, the 4 gear will generally just help slow down that rotation a little bit to make the car easier to drive, especially when you're coming off power. Like when we talked about the rear belt being too tight, it'll be the same thing for the diffs. Running 4 gears will just give a bit of stability to the car when you do that. We generally start on 10k. You can go to 7k on the oils, and you'll be doing that because you want more rotation. More rotation, normally thinner oils on the car, allows all the wheels to do all their work quicker. Whereas when you go thicker and thicker, add stability, sometimes it gives you a bit more drive as well when you run it higher because the wheels aren't spinning up as much coming out of corners. But you've always got to judge it. Sometimes a thinner oil might help you because it's helping it kind of grip up and move quicker. But that's where you need to judge the circumstance and the nature of the track. Every setup that we ever talk about normally is related to the track we just raced on. Some things generally do certain things, but you need to look at the environment where you've just raced on. If you try that change on one track, it isn't necessarily going to be the best thing for you on the next track, and that's where you've got to identify it and maybe go back to where you were and try something else. But always remember, with any setup change, is to go back to where you were if something wasn't working and then try something again, because if it worked on the previous track and you felt it had a good balance, and you go to the next track and the balance isn't quite there, you need to find that balance before you start doing anything too crazy. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this. It's just a short one. Hopefully it's been beneficial to you and you've enjoyed what you've watched. I will see you soon. I'm going to do a video on the suspension of the L1 Evo and various other bits and bobs to do with these cars that we look after. I'll see you soon. Look after yourselves. Goodbye.